Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode, we catch up with Justin Gilpin, the CEO of Kansas Wheat. Justin, welcome. There's a lot that's happened in the wheat world since our last visit, so let's catch up on some activities as we record this. We're in late June here, and harvest is in the heat of it. It's really going fast, heat literally speaking. As we record this, it's hot and windy outside in Kansas. How are things looking so far for the 2024 crop?
Well, we are definitely getting into the heat of it, Aaron. It's certainly been hot the last couple of days. I know that we're recording this about a week before it's going to drop and get out there. But first of all, I'd like to say it's good to be back in the bunker with you here on the podcast. It's been great to see how well this podcast is being received, and certainly some very good interviews that you've done that are beyond just timely. Those are something that I think a lot of people, if you haven't had a chance to check out some of those past podcasts, to get back and listen to Aaron's conversations, because they've been really enlightening, and I think kind of podcasts that are worth revisiting too. So kudos to you, and it's great to see the podcast really taking off. To talk a little bit about this year's wheat crop, there's been a lot of variability, obviously, as with the Kansas crop as we headed into it, and with everybody was really concerned because of the drought and the lack of rain and the conditions that the crop started to deteriorate through March and April and first part of May, and that was unfortunately with how the crop had gotten established in the fall. We really thought we had good prospects going into the winter. That's really leading into the variability that we're seeing as far as even within the same county and within miles of each other. You're seeing pretty wide ranges in yields and overall performance from some of the wheat as it's coming in. That has to do with variety, whether somebody caught a rainfall, whether you were hit by the freeze, or we're seeing disease. So this is one of those crops that have it all. But I think the common theme that a lot of people are saying that gets overused probably sometimes is better than expected, right? And so what was it that was really expected is probably what needs to be put that in context. But the fact that we are having a better crop in a lot of areas than we've had the last couple of years, it is good to see, and there's certainly some farmers that were deserving to have a wheat crop like this because of the challenges they've had the last couple of years.
Yeah, this one was different, and they're all different, but the fact that we actually had a good stand and got wheat established last fall, in some ways that's almost been worse, I think, because guys have had to watch it go downhill this spring when it didn't rain, started good and going downhill. But I think we've certainly seen the difference on how important it is to get that wheat up in fall, and I know we've said it before, but it's a real tip of the hat to our wheat breeders and scientists, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We know that the genetics are better now than they were 10 years ago. We know that farmers are implementing management practices that are giving that wheat crop a chance to have higher yield potential than what we did a decade ago. We just needed Mother Nature to cooperate. Hopefully markets can cooperate, right? Because at the end of the day, you need that return per acre to ultimately define how good that wheat crop is for each of our producers. And hopefully if we can do what we can working with our breeding community, research community, to put those genetics in place, that at least from that aspect, the capability of good yields and that to help out on that return per acre, certainly out there. And we're seeing that not just within the public varieties that are out there, but certainly with the private varieties that are out there as well, is really raised the bar. And so it's a real testament to the breeders, but then also farmers that have worked to make that investment into those breeding programs.
Well, speaking of varieties, you keep pretty close tabs. There's some new ones out there and some standbys that have had a pretty good run. What are some of the highlights you're seeing?
Well, I think it's been one of those years that's been really good to get out and look at test plots, right? One of the values of getting out to field days is not only being able to see actual varieties and side-by-side comparisons in these stress conditions or in certain conditions, being able to actually talk with extension folks and researchers or breeders that are at the field days, but then also a chance to be able to interact with your local neighbors and kind of hear. Sometimes you learn as much about talking to your neighbor about what's working and what's not working. But across the spectrum, it's been a really good year to see those field days I know one variety that you're passionate about, that you've had a lot to do with, and it's still in its early stages, but it looks like KS Bill Snyder looks to be really solid variety this year, and it's going to be limited seed available for this fall, but with its disease package and yield potential, hopefully that with that name recognition, it'll be as worthwhile as that variety's namesake. Would be pretty exciting to see that as a success story across, AgriPro for the central part of the state. One variety that I didn't really notice was AP Prolific. Looks to be really a good-looking variety. It's going to be kind of exciting to see how it does the next couple years. And, of course, the West bred varieties, 4792 out west has been pretty strong. And I think the WB 4422 looks to be one that may be a replacement for Grainfield. Grainfield's been a solid variety. It's been around for a long time, but I think some of these newer varieties for farmers that have had some of these older varieties, they ought to be considering buying some seed and kind of getting these new genetics in their rotations and in their operation. Really would be a pretty solid. And of course, the coax wheats are getting a lot of attention, both from Plains Gold and Lima Grain, for being able to have that weed control with that extra added benefit with those varieties. Looks to be pretty exciting. And of course, Oklahoma State has some Brett Carver. I know Dave likes to get his pokes comment in here, but Oklahoma State, of course, it looks to be pretty solid with they've got a new variety they're pretty excited about with High Cotton. And Showdown was one that was released a couple years ago. It looks to be pretty solid, and I know Brett Carver down at Oklahoma State has been looking for that variety to replace that double stop, which still has quite a bit of popularity, but certainly is getting some age on it. It's exciting to see this next generation of wheat varieties that are coming into the Southern Plains. That's really starting to move the needle.
Dave, our podcast producer, proud Okie, by the way, good cowboy. So we have to talk about, wheat genetics. We talk about this often about how we invest the check off on behalf of farmers, but having that genetic pipelines, diseases evolve. I'm afraid one thing we're seeing this year is that there's two viruses, wheat streak mosaic virus and triticum mosaic virus, that kind of go hand in hand, and we're kind of seeing that triticum, which we call TRIMV, kind of emerge, and boy, that's going to be a big hurdle for us in the future, isn't it?
Well, this was a year to kind of see how varieties are going to stand up. It's been a triticum year. Scientists are really trying to spend a lot of time thinking about why we're seeing to that extent this year, whereas maybe even more widespread than maybe wheat streak, and fields that people thought they had wheat streak actually was triticum. And so trying to look at what varieties have that resistance, what's going into maybe that might have caused that virus to be kind of have the right environment to take off this year. I think that's something that our researchers are going to spend a lot of time discussing here this summer and this fall and looking at it. And one of the things I should have mentioned, I guess, also is another variety that does look good and that seems to be holding up well against that triticum is one of my favorite varieties. It's a hard white wheat variety. KS Big Bow looks to be really solid out west, and being a hard white wheat, that it's important to know where you're going to market it, but its yield potential and what it could bring to the table in an operation, especially when you're seeing pressures like this on some of the older varieties that are out there, and you're trying to spread out your risk. That's what the understanding what these varieties have in their genetic potential and how you mitigate risk, and hopefully these genetics can help farmers be a solution to problems that are emerging.
As we work towards those new genetics, and the wheat breeders are really hard at it, we just remind farmers, control that volunteer wheat. That's the one cultural control that we have at our disposal until we can get new improved genetics out there. So, the market, as we record this the last week in June, is kind of taking a little rough hit here, a little bit of harvest pressure.
Well, I think that's, if you're listening to the radio, I think that's, you'll hear a lot of analysts say, we've got harvest pressure, but there's been a lot of bigger things at play also that have kind of weighed on this market, probably had a bigger sell-off than maybe what it should. And so that's one of the frustrations with this market is how it is reacting and to momentum, and as far as how futures react to managed money. That's really influential in movements in markets and somewhat to global headlines. And so you certainly saw a pretty rough last 3 weeks for not only Kansas City, but also Minneapolis and Chicago, and nearly $1.50 break from where we were at kind of as we began harvest. Part of that is, if you look globally, Turkey's announcement of banning wheat imports certainly weighed on the market. That came on a Friday, and Friday afternoon has kind of hit the wires, and that the fact that that freed up 5 to 6 million metric tons of a shortened Russian wheat crop. Now that's going to go into other places at bearish input. And of course, you mentioned Russia. And one of the reasons we took that spike up was everybody was getting concerned about Russian wheat production and what that might mean. Who knows what to believe when it comes to Russia right now. And that's probably one of the biggest risks that we've allowed ourselves as the global wheat market to be in a position where someone that you don't know what's right or what a reliable information source about their crop is actually having 25% of the world wheat trade under their control, and the fact that they have pretty strong track record of government interventions on their 1/4 of the global wheat trade. That certainly was in the back of traders' minds, and why we had that run up. That the early reports would look to be maybe a little, they're using the same line that you've been using, Aaron, a little bit better than expected about their frost damage and drought impacts. They're certainly going to have a smaller crop, but maybe it's not as bad as they were thinking of, is somewhat of the early initial reports from their harvest. But I'd like to think that after the sell-off, we did see some demand spike up this last week with U.S. wheat export sales, and so I'd like to think that we've kind of gotten past the major sell-off in this market, and we can kind of bottom out and start looking at other things like what's going on with corn and soybeans, and some big concerns maybe about what's going to come out of an acreage report that's going to come out before this podcast comes out. But a lot of eyes will be on that report, and it historically is somewhat of a market mover. But the corn crop, I was just up in South Dakota, and there's a wide area of South Dakota, Iowa, and Minnesota that getting hit pretty hard by historical amount of rainfall. I got detoured off I-29 because of closure, because of flooding, and so unfortunately for those farmers in that area, a tragic situation that's certainly going to lose millions of bushels of corn and soybeans. That not sure how the market's going to digest that, but certainly we'll be watching.
Wheat export market year started June 1st. What's kind of USDA's perspective on that?
Well, it's going to be up, so that's
hard not to.
Right after a historically low year this last year, the market conditions and low production. So it's good to see that exports are anticipated to be at 800 million bushels for the U.S. this year, and we are off to a strong start with our export sales. I think even hard red winter wheat, as we're going into the end of June here, is already kind of 10% ahead of the pace that we're going to need to hit the USDA forecast for exports. And it's good to see that getting back into play in that global market, and hopefully can be competitive and get those bushels moved that ultimately can get our crop to our international customers, but then also help create that demand for our farmers.
I certainly don't want to get deep into border security, but it has posed some challenges with wheat movement into Mexico, hasn't it?
Well, Mexico obviously has been our strongest wheat partner, being our largest customer the last several years, and that relationship we have with that direct rail being able to move into Mexico is it's like an extension of our domestic market, especially for our Southern Plains hard red winter wheat. Where, as we've seen, because of border security and immigration issues, migrant issues really impacted rail movement back after we unload cars, move the cars back into the U.S. It's Class 1 railroads are watching that daily, and market participants are watching that daily. Hate to see that type of disruption happening on such a potential reliable market as we have in Mexico.
Tough market situations like this, I think one of the things we're working from a Kansas wheat perspective is to tell the story about wheat beyond the value of the grain. What you get when you sell it across the scale is certainly one thing, but I think most farmers know, and we've trying to do a better job of just explaining the value of having wheat in that crop rotation.
Well, it's an important piece, and it always has been an important piece. When you have our farmers are diversified, they are on the front lines of environmentalists and taking care of their farms and their operations, and what wheat brings as far as that soil health with the stubble residue, being able to have it in a rotation where you can break pest and disease cycles is something farmers have always known, but are really starting to lean into and leverage even more. Certainly in the eastern part of the state, the amount of double cropping acres we're seeing with wheat and soybeans and rotations. One of our counterparts in Illinois is running specific programs with their Illinois wheat and soybean associations and promoting the sustainability aspects of wheat and soybeans in rotations, and beyond just the soil health, protecting from soil erosion, trying to mitigate water loss, all of the things that wheat brings to the table. There's a lot of focus on double cropping, and we're pretty in depth in discussions with NRCS about how a winter wheat crop brings all of the things that they're trying to accomplish with double crops, that also is feeding people and trying to position the United States in not just national but global food security, and making sure that those bushels can play a role in that, as well as be a major component of climate smart agriculture. We really need to continue to be a strong voice and advocate for where wheat is in these programs as we're moving forward. And kudos to you also, Aaron, on everything that you're doing and working with Romulo on the value beyond the grain. So I know that you work really hard at that and are passionate about that, and we'll look forward to seeing that messaging really kind of take shape here in the next year or two.
See good reminders in the harvest time of the year when we see those stripper headers out there leaving all that valuable straw behind. It's just a reminder of that additional layer of value there. Well, Justin, let's do a little bit of lightning round here on some issues and goings on. We'll just start with the bad news first. Let's get this out of the way. I've been given tours of the Wheat Innovation Center for 12 years and said we haven't been hit by a hailstorm, and I finally jinxed us.
You absolutely, every time you would say that, we knocked on wood. We were proud of the fact that the Innovation Center had, the new greenhouses were built with acrylic glass that had the ability to withstand quarter-size hail, and for 10 years we were able to do that, but unfortunately we found out it does not withstand baseball-size hail. And so that's certainly a challenge that we're dealing with here at the Innovation Center, as well as farmers across the state. I know have had to deal with the weather extremes and severe hailstorms. But yes, the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center is looking for a new roof on our greenhouse right now.
So if there's any roofers out there with experience with greenhouses, but good news is we have insurance on the facility, so the farmer investment, that roof will get replaced, and the research work has not been interrupted by that. It's a good thing it's acrylic and not glass, and so we will get that fixed. You recently attended a World Staff Conference for U.S. Wheat Associates, where they bring their staff from all around the world together. Give us some highlights there, and talk about Kansas and who's moving through the leadership role there.
Well, we talked about exports earlier on here, but it was great to be able to. That's the one event that happens every 2 years where we actually get to see, there's 13 overseas offices for U.S. Wheat Associates that states like Kansas, through the Kansas Wheat Commission, help fund and support alongside of matching funds that come from USDA through the Foreign Ag Services. And to be able to have all of those overseas staff in one place to be able to talk about what this year's wheat crop looks like, where we're going to need to put our areas of priority and our messaging to do what we can to try to maybe gain back some of the market share that we lost, and what do we need to do to position ourselves kind of going forward. Was really great discussions, and for the first time since the mid-2000s that Kansas is going to have a farmer that's going through the leadership positions within U.S. Wheat Associates. So we're excited to have Gary Millershaskii from Lake, Kansas. That's the summer meeting. He'll take the Secretary-Treasurer position within U.S. Wheat Associates and be able to move through that exec team. So it's exciting to have somebody from Kansas again being in that leadership role of our national organization.
The last person from Kansas to be chair of U.S. Wheat Associates was Ron Supas from Dighton, Kansas, and that's a nice segue to the fact that we had the Wheat Foods Council have a meeting here in Manhattan, their summer meeting. Ron just happened to be now the outgoing chairman of the Wheat Foods Council. It was great to have that group here in town also. Tell us about that.
Well, it was. I think Ron really was excited to be able to have the national board from Wheat Foods Council be in Manhattan for several days, not only for meetings, but being able to showcase the investment Kansas farmers have made at the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center and the work that's going on here from that aspect, but then also the public-private partnerships that are kind of taking place within the Kansas Wheat Innovation Center, with farmers working alongside of the third largest milling company in the U.S. with Graincraft, but then, of course, Heartland Plant Innovations and everything that's happening here alongside of Kansas State University. It's really a good story to tell, and if I'm not wrong, Aaron, I think that was the meeting that you really did jinx us, because I think that was the last tour you gave.
You are correct.
And about
Yes.
3 hours later is when we got baseball-sized hail.
Thanks for pointing that out.
The Wheat Foods Council meeting, they're the organization that really focuses on domestic market production. And, it was good to be able to have some real candid discussion with that group while they're here about where do we need to be focusing, where can we move the needle when it comes to domestic demand, which obviously is a lot of times pretty static, but we are dealing with generational low flour per capita consumption that we need to be having on the forefront of our discussions, and what are those challenges that kind of faced with, as far as diet trends, but then also a lot of our companies that participate in the Wheat Foods Council, they on their radar screen, they're certainly keeping an eye on like the Ozempic shots and those new things that are coming to the marketplace that may be impacting potential demand and usage and for our domestic flour that gets milled and put into products. So there's really good discussions, and how we tell that farmer story to our domestic customers is becoming more and more important. And the fact that Wheat Foods Council serves as that organization that has a majority makeup of producers along with flour millers and bakers makes it a pretty unique national organization to be the ones to help deliver that message.
And finally, speaking of stories, the story this year is a great one. This is the 150th anniversary of Mennonites introducing turkey red and winter wheat to Kansas. It's kind of special for us. There's a lot of activities going on. Does mean a lot for our current wheat industry, doesn't it?
Well, and I think you've done a really good job with guests that you've had on and discussions you've had on previous podcasts and helping highlight that historical story, that monumental story of the beginnings of the wheat industry, not only in Kansas but in the United States, and how all of the things that came into play with that is with railroads and beginning of communities and relationships of those communities and establishment in rural America. Turkey red winter wheat is actually at the heart of a lot of those stories, and the fact that this is the 150th year of when we kind of recognize that beginning. Yeah, I know you have an opportunity where you're going to be out in Inman, Kansas, kind of at a harvest celebration where you're going to be, I think, the keynote speaker talking about it.
So I think just a brief. No one would pay me or not pay me to be the keynote.
It's certainly getting a lot of attention this year, and I'm proud of our communications group for what they've done and highlighting that story. And of course, we've been doing some giveaways on social media that's getting a lot of attention with our shop stool that commemorates the 150 year of turkey red winter wheat. And thanks to everybody that's helped tell that story. And if you're not familiar with that story, I'd encourage people to listen to some of your previous podcasts and check out some of the communication that's been put together on the KS Wheat website.
And there'll be more storytelling about that as the year goes around. And I'm looking forward to going to Inman and seeing some turkey red wheat harvested. So we'll see how that goes. Well, Justin, we'll wrap it up there. As usual, thank you for your time, and we'll catch up and update everybody down the road.
Well, I hope everybody has wrapping up their harvest safe and having a bountiful harvest. I know it's a special time of year, but again, I appreciate all that you do with this podcast, Aaron, and thanks for everybody for tuning in.
My thanks to Justin Gilpin, the CEO of Kansas Wheat, for joining us on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have a follow-up question you'd like to ask Justin, just email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.